So members, please do not spend too much time on individual cases. Thank you.
Mr. Vincent Chang. Madam Deputy, I would like to speak on the 2018 Appropriation Bill. Madam Deputy, the FS announced in his 1890 budget that we have a surplus of $138 billion and the reserve is $1,092 billion and the public coffers are flushed with money. The FS has proposed measures to share the fruits of economic success with the community, but there are inadequacies and the DAB has asked for more to be done and we hope to benefit the grassroots more. So ultimately, the FS has decided to give a cash handout of $4,000 to those who are benefiting. We welcome that, but there are several points that I'd like to raise. Now, for the Carrie Lam's new fiscal policy, we have expectations. We must benefit those who are missed out on the budget. We expect that the FS can give more thoughts to drawing up the budget. We don't want to get disappointed and then hopeful again, and then disappointed and hopeful again. Now, this is there is a $4,000 hash can out, and eligible members of the public can make applications only in February next year, and they can receive the money in April. So a lot of the members of the public said that's too late. So I hope that the government can later on tell us that they can expedite the process, and we don't have to wait till next April to get the $4,000. In 2011, for the $6,000 handout, well, it was announced in March, and the people got the money in October. So if the government could streamline the procedures and the process, then that will make everyone happy. Administrative cost is around $300 million, and it's astonishing. Compared to 2011, it's $110 million more. Can we cut down on that? Because we are giving out Ocean Park tickets, $300 million, and then if we add in $1 billion, then we can waive the rental for PRH tenants all over Hong Kong. Now, we've made calculations. If $300 million is divided by $4,000, an extra 27,000 people will benefit. So I hope that the government can streamline your process. Third, the DAB has done many rounds of consultation. We've made many proposals. The healthcare voucher, the amount has been increased to $3,000, and also after school service, more should be provided. And the property prices are very high. And many years ago, there was the interest can be deducted as an allowance, but the FS earlier said that even the rental can be deducted. So I hope that that can be done. And for those households which have been on the PRH waiting list for 3 years, rent subsidy should be given to them because they normally live in subdivided units, poor conditions. I've asked Carrie Lam earlier. I know that the government has reservation on rent subsidy. They are worried that it will ultimately go to the landlords. But I hope that the government can think up more measures to help those living in the subdivided units, to help them address their problems. Now, next, I would like to talk about housing. Now, the FS in the budget said in the next 5 years, the public housing construction target is around 100,000 units and 75,000 BRH and 25 SSF subsidized sales flats. The long-term housing target is not achieved, and in the next few years, every year there will only be 20,000 public housing units and 28,000. There is a difference. So in 4 years, there will be a shortfall of 40,000 units. How can you catch up? Now, tomorrow, the task force on land supplies will consult the public on land options for 5 months. There will be a great debate. I hope that we can bear the overall interest of the public in mind. Now, we have 280 households on the waiting list, and many of them are now living in subdivided units, and they're inadequately housed, and they're waiting eagerly for a unit. Now, people said that there are 110,000 units who are not adequately housed, and 90,000 are in SDUs, and that doesn't include those living in the industrial buildings. So there are a total of 160,000 people inadequately housed. So after the great debate, we may have more land supply, we can build more public housing, and this is something good for Hong Kong. HOS, 3 years waiting lists. I hope that will not be empty talk. Now, the HOS supply is also falling short of expectations, and in the latest round of HOS play, there are 4,400 units, and there's Kai Long and Kwai Yun in Kowloon, and the cost is over $10,000 per square foot, and the highest priced unit is $6.3 million worth. So the FS said that he will look at delinking the HOS prices with the market prices, but please give us a timetable. I don't mind having another debate on that front as well. Please proceed with it. 70% of market rates is totally unacceptable. Should it be linked to the affordability of people, or try to give more discounts, or you use the construction cost basis and add in a certain percentage? That is subject for discussion. Now, HOS sales prices could be as low as 40% of the market price in the past. So let's try to forge a consensus. Let's make decisions after deliberations. I like running marathon. I hope that we can catch up on our delays. Now, I'm going to talk to talk about social housing. Social housing in overseas jurisdictions has been developed for a long time, but in Hong Kong, we have a lengthy discussion on this. But then it seems, as of today, it still seems as something new. Last week, we went to the Bay Area, but in the mainland, there are many new types of thinking to address different problems, housing, land, etc. We must come up with short, medium, and long-term measures. Hong Kong is small, and we have a large population. We must also provide interim housing. After Carrie Lam assumed office in September, she launched the social housing policy, and she accepted the DAB's suggestion that we involve the social enterprises to be the secondary landowners. So the subsidized housing can be, say, rented to those on the PRH waiting list. But now the housing society only is involved in it, and it provides 9,000 units, and they are now being occupied by people. So the supply will be very limited. I hope that the housing society can launch such housing in the latter half of this year and receive applications. So that those living in the 230,000 HOS flats with premium paid can also join the program. And now 10 NGOs are joining this social housing program, including the Lighthouse organization, and there is this community housing program. The HKCSS has put a lot of information on its website on this particular housing program, and these welfare organizations, for those who are now living in subdivided units and who have been on the PRH waiting list for 3 years, and for the elderly and the needs with special families, provide special housing, and the tenancy can last only for 2 to 3 years, and the monthly rental is $2,000 to $3,000. I support this kind of social housing. I've met with individual organizations. I've understood how they operate the program and the difficulties encountered. This is something new, and it's not just the NGOs, but I think the different parties have to be very careful, and we have to safeguard their interest. I respect these NGOs for doing such programs, but after all, maybe the private owners and developers may donate some of their units. They may come in small numbers. They are they will only be rented out on a short-term basis, and they're being very passive. I note that the FS, under the heading of livability, proposes that vacant government lands and school premises can be used and rented out to NGOs on a short-term basis, and these school premises can be put to the best use. I know that the FS has reserved $1 billion for eligible projects for providing basic infrastructure facilities. What matters more is to try to coordinate among government departments. And Shakib May Street, there was this old school premises. Whenever we talk to the EDB, they said that it's flat, but then it's been idling. It's been idle for a number of years. I hope that the vacant school premises and land can be rented out on a short-term basis more, so that welfare organizations can build public housing on them. Now, in the West Kowloon, there are many sites which have been idle for over 10 years, and nothing is being done on them. The government should provide more interim housing, should build more prefabricated housing, provide more such housing. I look forward to the government making the best use of $1 billion. Details should be announced as soon as possible. We don't have a minute to lose. I hope that we can hear more news in this regard. Lastly, I would like to talk about urban renewal. In West Kowloon, there are so many old buildings which are, say, 40 or 50 years old. Recently, the government said, shared some figures on their distribution geographically. The FS said that through urban renewal, redevelopment, urban railway development to provide more housing units in the short and medium term, the area will no longer work on demand-led housing. And we all agree that we should have a district-based redevelopment. We should not just work on standalone buildings, as what the CE said. The community redevelopment is good. But the government said that renewal is not the only option. We can have rehabilitation. We can just add in some lift, and that would be good enough. But let's look at the Yao Mong program that the study has gone on for 1 year. I asked the secretary last week. He said that no detail can be given. Now, so many buildings, and there are now 5,300 buildings aged over 50. How can we catch up with the delay? There are so many old buildings in West Kowloon. There is the OBB, but then say the landlords have to pay say $60,000 to $70,000 to work on the exterior walls. So a lot of people have told me that they want urban renewal to be speeded up. Now, I hope that the government can relax the subsidy criteria for OBB, Operation Building Bright, and many aged buildings are waiting to be refurbished or renewed. Where there is redevelopment, renewal, I think is urgent, and I hope that the URA can speed things up. If there is a lack of resources, the government must give them the money, so that those living in the old districts can really harbor some hope in the future. I so submit.
Mr. Chen Han-pan, thank you. I'd like to talk about health, services and transport. In Paris 2122, it talks about connecting with the Bay Area and also turning Hong Kong into a cross-boundary logistics center. However, by paying $15, we are going to make the Chiang Mai link very congested, and on the artificial island there are 600 car parking spaces. There will be no parking spaces in this so-called logistics hub. Our rails are also saturated. You remember, in the past, the government would make long-term plans for a blueprint for our transport development. And if we look at the records, starting from 1976, there have been 3 comprehensive transport studies drawing up agendas for transport studies. In 1976, after the first comprehensive transport study, we decided on building the MTR, and then in 1989 we had the second one, and we decided on building infrastructural projects including North Lantau Expressway, Changquan-O, and also the West Rail, etc. These are the trunk lines. And in 1999, 10 years after that, we decided to complete the third comprehensive transport study, and we have decided on the railway being the backbone of our transport system. 19 years have passed, and we can see that still we are not conducting the fourth comprehensive transport study. In this period, Hong Kong's population and tourist arrivals and cross-boundary people flow and traffic flow, etc., have markedly improved. When we had the third CTS, well, that was after 1997, and it was only drawing up a strategy up to 2016. What happened after 2016 until now? We haven't seen the government starting any strategy study. In 2014, at the end of that year, the administration started a public transport strategy study, coming up with 67 measures, but they are all disconnected. There is no blueprint for transport development at all. If the administration has already established a transport strategy of having railway as the backbone, what about other modes of public transport? Can they be given a role that they can play? We are saturated in our transport system. We don't have an even distribution or enough parking spaces. We don't have an integrated society for the disabled. What about electric cars and their development, and also people's quality of life? We all want to have better walk paths, and in order to tie in with the development in the Bay Area, we also have to consider about cross-boundary traffic. A lot of people are moving from the city or built-up area to the northwest of the new territories. This is a big people movement, and they require transport. Every time when we talk about development, the opposition is always about the provision of transport. Still today, we do not have any long-term planning for our future transport system. We are really very worried. You are still groping in the dark, and we don't know what would happen with our transport scene. Without a long-term plan, there is no way you can bring progress to society. We believe that officials should do balance and coordination and also help society improve, but you also have to act as a leader. You have to lead society walk down a path of long-term planning and the right direction. If we have good planning, what happens? Just look at RDS 2014. It allows us to have another 15 years for development. In 2014, we made a plan so that by 2026, we'll be able to take forward railway development. Now we're in 2018. How much of the railway development strategy mapped out in 2014 has been completed? We have the Northern Corridor, we have Kutong, the Tongchong extension line, and also SILW, and also Island's North Line. And even the East Kowloon Line, Mr. Wilson Orr has been chasing you up for it, but we see no sign of it. 4 years have passed. What are we seeing? A lot of our railways have been completed. We see the completion of the XRL Hong Kong section, and also the South Island Line, and also the Sha Tin Central Link. Where do the workers go after that? They may lose their job, and then they need to change trade to do other things, or they may go elsewhere to work. But then later on, we also have to build new railways, as I mentioned. Where do we get the manpower for it? Our railway development and transport infrastructure are all interlinked. Why did we do RDS in 2014? It is because some railways would be completed, and then we can start other projects to continue to engage the workers. But now there is a missing link. 4 years have passed, and I don't see a new report, and this year we are not going to start the completion of any railway. The railway workers will lose their job, and then later on we will say that we don't have workers. We want to do cross-boundary logistics, but then we also need to look forward. So FS, if we want to be a leader in the financial development for Bay area, we must have a comprehensive transport study done. I hope you will do it in a strategic manner. And I don't want you just to talk about it without mapping out a strategy and direction. Next, I'd like to talk about Chinese medicine. This year, the administration has been very good. It has listened to us. It is quite willing to set up a dedicated department to develop Chinese medicine. This particular group will also coordinate and promote different matters. You were unwilling in the past, but then in the policy address and the budget, we are seeing this done. The Chinese medicine sector has blamed the administration all these years for not investing any money into the development of their trade. This year, finally, you are putting aside $500 million to develop Chinese medicine and also support research programs. We support it. All these years, the DAB has been working for the development of Chinese medicine. The FS is putting aside $500 million for research. We think it is a right move, but it is not enough for really developing Chinese medicine. We have 18 Chinese medicine study center or clinic. These Chinese medicine centers for training and research, they are tripartite setups. But for it to be of a tripartite setup, people have to pay $200 per consultation. If you also go for acupuncture, you will have to pay even more. And so it is difficult to popularize Chinese medicine, and it cannot really enter mainstream society. We believe you should provide public general outpatient clinic service for Chinese medicine. In the budget, it is said that in Kwai-Ching, there will be a district health center which will provide better primary care service. I think it is the right thing to do because Hong Kong has not done a good job with primary health care. We are not even starting to do it. A lot of our medical resources concentrate in the hands of the HA. But you have not been doing a lot for primary care because it can help to prevent diseases. But with regard to this primary health care district center, it doesn't include Chinese medicine. Actually, Chinese medicine is a major medical concept. If you can introduce Chinese medicine into primary health care to be provided at the district health center in Kwai-Ching, I believe it will be a big help to the citizens. If our centers are given the money and then you think you have done everything for primary health care, again, it is a joke. I hope it will be done partly by government and then partly by different organizations in society. You can encourage different organizations in society to help do prevention work. Also, in the budget, you have put aside money to help people with uncommon diseases. So extremely expensive medicine for treating uncommon diseases can be helped. People with uncommon diseases have cried and told us that they really could not afford the medicine. If someone falls sick, the entire family will be made poor. Through the Community Care Fund and cooperating with other organizations, you are providing subsidies to people with uncommon diseases, and the DAB welcomes it. And also, this has something to do with prenatal examination. Every year, 50,000 babies are born in Hong Kong. There are advanced DNA tests which will cost $7,000. If everyone does this DNA test, it will take about $500 million. But our prenatal care or examination provided by administration has not progressed at all since the 1980s. We hope you can provide better prenatal care. If before a baby is born and you can provide good prenatal examination for each couple, then basically all genetic diseases can be discovered, so parents will not find out that their babies are sick after they are born. Some people become sick only when they are in their 40s or 50s, and it will have a big impact on themselves and their families. We hope, therefore, more money will be put aside for prenatal examination. On the other hand, there is this hot topic in society, and that is ADHD. It is a lack of concentration, and also that these children tend to be overactive. The golden period for treatment is from 6 years to 9 years. If they miss the opportunity, they may have psychological problems when they grow up, and they may not be able to communicate with others, so they have very poor interpersonal relationship. And this will do no good for such children. There are about 40,000 children affected by ADHD, and out of those, 30,000 are treated by public hospitals. But with regard to full-time child psychiatrists, there are only 37, and the ratio is 1 to 873. Therefore, the queue is extremely long, and you may miss the golden opportunity to treat these children. We therefore propose that you would make the best use of public-private partnership, so children who have been waiting for long can patronize a private doctor, so they do not queue for so long, and they can receive early treatment without having their sickness deteriorating. Last but not least, I'd like to talk about our policy for psychiatric diseases. In April last year, you released the report on psychiatric treatment, and you are making 40 proposals for 20 different areas of concern, so as to provide better treatment for psychiatric problems in Hong Kong. The DAB has been asking the administration to provide more resources for improving psychiatric services in Hong Kong. I have been to psychiatric hospitals myself, and the manpower is extremely undersupplied. One nurse has to take care of over 20 patients at night, and there may not be enough beds, and people are discharged prematurely. But as you know, if a psychiatric patient is still unstable and he is discharged, what will be the result? Well, of course, he will be hospitalized. And then this is not good at all for the patient at all. And there may also be harm done to his family and society. I therefore hope that the administration will come up with a long-term plan for psychiatric services. We have these district psychiatric rehabilitation centers, but they do not have enough resources. We hope that in the budget, you can take another look at the resources put aside for district organizations which can support psychiatric patients and their families, and decide whether it is enough. Madam Deputy, with regard to health and transport, this is what I like to say.
Mr. Lau Kok-fan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In recent years, the government has been breaking records in surplus, and the surplus now, the reserve now stands at, the surplus was some $138 billion this year. So the government will have plenty of resources to plan for the future, and it's supposed to make people happy. But then we have to see why there is a huge surplus of $138 billion, and we find that it comes mostly from non-current revenues such as land sales or stamp duty from securities transactions. For such non-recurrent revenue, there's a high price to pay for the public. We have to suffer high property prices or high rentals. So there is a price to pay for this surplus. Is it something to make us happy? So it's hard to say. Okay, with this surplus, people suffer to make it happen. The DAB therefore believes the government should make the most of these resources. We should invest in the future, in education, healthcare, housing, and so on. so we could improve the quality of living of the public in the long run. The other aspect is to return wealth to the people, because now people have to pay high rents or high property prices, so there ought to be relief measures. That's why the DBA has come up with a comprehensive set of demands in relation to the budget. Yes, it's true the government has taken up some of the mainstream recommendations. They have invested in healthcare and education, but when it comes to returning wealth to the public, there was a problem. We talked to the government on many occasions in the past. The government has tried various means to return wealth to the public. Some involved direct payments, others become rather complicated. And when it's complicated, then the public have to punch all the calculators over and over again to see how much they may get or whether they're eligible. So people become frustrated in a way. And that's why we said, you just do it in a straightforward manner. Just pay cash handout to return money to the people. Well, after an incident, the government decided to take heed of public views, and then is now giving $4,000 to those left out from the budget goodies. So the government has taken heed of public views, but then is a more complicated way to return wealth to the people. And when I go to the districts, residents will ask me, well, I'm paying rate, but I've received old age allowance, so how much can I get now? So people ask me these questions. That means that people have to spend a long time to work out whether they're eligible and how much they'll get. And of course, they're not a part of the government. The administrative costs and the staff time required will be substantial. And we know that the soonest it will be next year before the public will actually get the payout. So people have to wait anxiously for it. Now, the last time when there was cash handout of $6,000 to $6.1 million, I think the administrative cost was just about $100 million. But now only 2.8 million people will get the $4,000 handout, and administrative costs has gone up, have doubled to $330 million. So is it really desirable? Because as Mr. Vincent Chang said, the administrative costs could have been given to more people instead. So next time when you want to return wealth to the public, I really would advise the government not to go for a complicated route. Go for a most cost-effective way to do it. And then you can devote more of your effort to planning for our future. So that's what I like to say on the budget as a whole. Now, on development, I would like to say something on behalf of the DAB, Development of Land. In the budget, of course, there is a section on land resources. Now, land and housing supply have always been a problem for Hong Kong. And then we are given progress on 250 sites of land, and but then what happens is we know from the budget that there is a shortage of land and housing, but there's nothing the government can do about it. Tomorrow, there will be a major debate on land supply. That's what the chief executive mentioned. I don't care what comes out of that debate. Maybe many sites will be offered. But from past experience on changing land use, and I've said this many times in this council, even if you offer up many different sites, can they be developed right away? Look at Northeast NT. Even this morning we had a subcommittee on one-child development, and then we see constant delay to the original time frame. Why? Because there are constraints, in particular in relation to the rehousing arrangement for affected tenants. I'm talking about affected tenants being given public housing without means test, and also the ex gratia compensation. If you don't resolve these two problems, it doesn't matter if you are able to come up with many different sites. So what happens if these sites were just lie idle? And it will take forever before these sites can be developed. For Northeast NT, for instance, it's been delayed now to 2019. So the government needs to be well prepared for the compensation package. Otherwise, this so-called debate on major debate on land supply would end up being just a talk shop. Now I want to talk about land resumption. Now, in some new development areas, there are huge sites, and the government won't to develop those sites in one go. They will do it in phases, and what will happen? So you may be living next to a site, a work site, because the site is being developed, and then there's dust problem and so on. But the government's procedure is that it has to gazette the site, and then it offers compensation before the site can be developed, and this is not a desirable arrangement, so you need to make changes to that. Let's say if you know, for instance, for Northeast NT, you know well in advance that you will be developing Kutong North, so you should first deal with the rehousing and compensation arrangement, and the government should resume the land in one go. I think it works better for the government because you can just resume the site, you can put it in your land bank, or after you resume the site, then you'll see whether you need to adjust the plans or the land use even. So I think the government should change its compensation practice. It shouldn't do it in phases. It should resume land in one go. Now, let's say after the debate, some land sites become available, but still there could be bottlenecks in land supply. Apart from just considering land supply, what about the plot ratio? So we could promote vertical development. In 2014, for new town and some new development areas, the government did increase plot ratio by 20%, but unfortunately only applied to residential sites. But actually, we don't just have a shortage or demand for residential sites. We also need some land for recreational purposes and other community services. So I hope the government will really review plot ratios. For example, homes for the elderly. In the NT, there are plenty of sites suitable for elderly homes because there's better air quality and the environment is nicer. But with the current legislation on homes for the elderly, would it restrict developments? Yes, definitely, because right now the height restriction is not more than 24 meters. I fully appreciate the safety and fire safety concerns behind the rationale of this requirement. But, technology has improved, our policies have improved, so shouldn't we move with the times and review height restrictions of this nature? That is under the residential care homes for the elderly ordinance, because then we're not able to provide more homes for the elderly. So I hope the Labour and Welfare Bureau would talk to the Development Bureau to see how we could make more efficient use of land sites. Next, I'd like to talk about Home Affairs. $8 billion has been set aside for the 18 districts to provide community facilities. And then $20 billion have been reserved for cultural facilities in future, or at least to study into the feasibility of cultural facilities. There are 26 recreation and sports projects of the government, and they will certainly help to provide more community facilities for the public. Now, for the $8 billion or the 26 projects, they just part of what we've been asking for in terms of community facilities. There are still some items left out. from the previous list. Now, the district councils may have approved some of these projects, and then it's not easy to get past electrical. And then within the department, within the government, departments are competing for resources. So it's possible that each year there is just one project put on the list. Now, the progress is not at all desirable. Now, for the $8 billion, can it be turned into a standing item? The DAB has asked for a community building fund. So each year the government should put some money into this fund to deal with the outstanding projects. Now, for projects costing over $30 million at the district level, they have to come to the electrical first. And what would be 30 million projects? It may not even be enough to build a footbridge. So it's very difficult for us to help the residents secure such facilities. Now, the works project costs have gone up substantially, so the threshold of $30 million is outdated in view of the DAB. Shouldn't the government consider inflation in works projects cost and adjust the threshold in a timely manner? Because really $30 million for a district project doesn't amount to much. Now, I represent the district councils. Many district councillors are fully aware of the concerns of residents. And then there's a trend of us getting more young and full-time district councillors. But then I don't think the remuneration of district councillors is keeping up with that development. And then, of course, office rentals and staff costs are going up too, so district councillors have a hard time. You know, every year or two we have to bring in new assistants, and every year or two we need to move our office because of hike in rentals. So if we have to do that, how can we provide a quality and steady service to the residents? So I hope the government will review the functions of district councillors, and for the accountable expenses, say for office and staff costs, shouldn't there be suitable adjustments so district councillors could better serve their communities? So on development and home affairs, that's all I like to say because of the time constraints. So thank you.
Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak on behalf of the DAB and also my own constituency, the agriculture and fisheries sector. Now, the focus of the budget has been very much on how you dish out cash out. Well, let's be fair to the budget. Well, every budget comes with its own pros and cons. Say, for example, we want to invest for the future of Hong Kong. Nobody will dispute that. But the question is how you implement the measures. And for the grassroots, the sector's demand, how can you meet with their demands in the next couple of years? What can you give them? This is, but there are pros and cons in this budget. The agriculture and fisheries sector, the greatest problem we face is land. Mr. Edward Lau referred to compensation issues. Let me talk about a matter in detail. And Yuen Long, South Kempton, South and NENT. Well, of course, agricultural land is involved. Well, let's not talk about the bad policies of the colonial government. Siwalan was good in giving out, setting up $5 billion fund. Say, for example, if the agriculture land is going to be resumed, the farmers have to be relocated. Well, you are giving $20,000 for a well resumed. So if I give you $60,000, you try to dig a well for me. No, that can't be done. The compensation schedule has not been changed or revised for over 30 years. So it's $30 for each chicken because that's set out in the law. And for inflation over the past decades has risen drastically. So it's way beyond what is set out in the compensation schedule. The government should review comprehensively the policy so that those who have to be relocated will get appropriate compensation. If you can't make a breakthrough in your mindset and change your policy, even if the task force on land supply provides 10 or 100 options, is not feasible. Now, fisheries industry. Well, reclamation. I'm going to talk about that. I will never say it's no demolition, no relocation. As long as you can let the fishermen fend from themselves, even allow them to go outside, then I will support your policy. Can you not give us a win-win solution? Every time that I ask the secretary, they said that it's not within my portfolio. It's the other the bureau. Well, when I asked the FHB, then they told me to seek assistance from another bureau. So you are passing the buck around. And whenever policies are implemented, you will always meet with opposition. Well, the other side, when members in the other side of the room have become opposition members because they have all along objected to your policy. So that other camp would like to create social conflict so that they can get more supporters. Now, the pro-establishment camp member are in the majority in the council. If you want to gauge our support, you should try to listen to us more. Then if we get more support within the community, then you will get more support from the community as a whole. So please just listen to the other side. You are heading in the wrong direction. Please reflect on this. Second thing, the illegal fishing. Let's not talk about land anymore. There are great conflicts in that area. There are 18 options to be floated by the task force. People are asked to tick the boxes, and there are going to be conflicts. The government said it's open-minded, but there are bound to be conflicts. We know that land can be made available through each and every option. The question is, how do you resolve the issues relating to the interest of those with a vested interest? Okay, in 2012, the government implemented a new policy, and there was a trawling ban. It doesn't mean that fishing is not allowed in Hong Kong. That only several types of fishing are not allowed. But when the government implemented the policy, you couldn't enforce the law effectively. As a result, Hong Kong waters are seeing a lot of illegal fishing activities, fishing vessels. They don't have the fishing permits, and they don't they are not fishing in the right with the right fishing methods. And for those who are licensed, will be actually watching those illegally fishing nearby. So they can't compete with these illegal fishers, and there is great conflict within the sector. I am law-abiding, but what I get is not as much as those who are engaging in illegal fishing. The FCD has asked the marine police to help with catching the illegal fishing vessels, but then no extra resources have been committed or added to the marine police. Well, they've got extra resources just because of Occupation Central movement. Over the years, the FCD has got one additional vessel to deal with the 1,600 square kilometers of water bodies. While the government said that they have conducted 1,000 400 to 1,700 inspections every year. But the illegal fishers are fined only several $1,000s, but nobody has ever been thrown to jail, and they are just fined $2,000, while they can have a catch worth over $20,000. So people are tempted to break the law. Several years ago, Dr. Ko Wing-man added new staff members to deal with illegal fishing, but there was no equipment asked. Is it the case that he was praying in his office, hoping that there would not be illegal fishermen coming over? Well, in that case, that just ask the Home Affairs Bureau to do more on the religious front. So the results are telling, and the results show us that the government is not doing a good enough job. So I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. Now, food safety and environmental hygiene. Well, columbarium. I would like to say something on that. When we are lacking land resources acutely, we are facing a shortage of housing, and even we don't find enough land for the deceased for their burial. Or Mr. Wilson Orr referred to a waiting time of 4 to 5 years for PRH units, and we have to wait for 46 months for a niche. Well, it's shorter than a PRH unit, so that's fair, right? The government has not done a proper job in its policy, and private columbaria can have a good, lucrative market. The niche is just very small in size, and then we have to wait for so many years. So the ratio isn't not right. You have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to buy a niche. And if you buy a niche, a private niche, doesn't mean that your mind can certainly can be at peace. And 144 private columbarium operators have sent in applications, and 10 have surrendered or given up on their operations. And some experts said that 2/3 at the most will continue to be granted a license, and 1/3 will not be complying with the requirements, and they have to close the business. What happened to the ashes? The government has some procedures, but it doesn't. It's not a solution in the long term for those who have bought such niches. They have not noticed whether the columbarium are law-abiding or not, and they haven't even signed a contract. So once the columbarium closed down, they can't get any compensation. The DAB would like to get information from the victims, will help them to seek compensation, and we find a place for the ashes of the deceased or ancestors. It's a difficult problem. To deal with the problem, the first thing is to try to change our convention. In December 2017, 12.9% of the deaths are dealt with through green burial. I hope that the government can promote green burial. We have to change our culture and traditions. In the Qin dynasty, the Emperor Qin had this big burial ground. In the Tang dynasty, the monk had this other pottery relics, and in 1949 the farmers were saying that they were digging all these very precious potteries made way back in Tang when they were farming. Now sometimes the ashes can be turned into a diamond using the latest technology. So a change of the mindset and culture takes a long time. We can't ask you to raise the ratio from 12.9% to 50% in a short time. But can you not give us a target? Try to speed things up. Lastly, I would like to talk about the building of new markets and improving existing markets. The government is putting $2 billion into the market modernization program. The government seems now determined to improve the market. I welcome that, but I would like to raise several points. We noticed that the selection, the location, scale, support facilities, and the timetable of new markets are to be questioned. The government announced last year that markets will be built in Tongchong and Tinshui Wai, and or Hongshouqiu rather, but people don't like to go to other districts to shop. But I don't see a timetable. Are they going to be managed still by the FEHD, or would you be doing something with the old markets, redevelop the markets, enlarge the size of the stores, and so on? So maybe store operators of existing markets can be incentivized to move to the new markets. So the government must have a breakthrough in its thinking. And we noticed that there has been the retrofitting of air conditioning in markets is going on very slowly. The many store operators are living from hand to mouth, and you may say that, well, that's not the case. But only a minority of people are not living from hand to mouth. And you can't use that as an excuse not to retrofit the markets with air conditioning. And the market can be easily closed for 1 year while air conditioning is being installed. And in that period, people don't have a place to shop. So please consider this. I understand many of the links markets are old markets and a refurbishment has been carried on. You criticize Link so much for raising the rental, and they can complete the works in 3 months to 6 months, and that's because they know how to leverage our market forces. They have a target-oriented approach. Say that in the tendering documents, they list the construction method and the construction period clearly. There might be higher tender prices returned, but that can ensure that the works can be completed in a short time. Now, I would like to give this piece of advice to the administration. We talk about cash handouts in the beginning. Every year, when the budget is announced, there are so many loopholes. And well, people will say something about these loopholes, and the government will respond that the CCF can plug the loopholes. How come that there are always shortcomings in the budget? Why do you want to present that kind of budget and then be criticized by the public? That's meaningless. So in the drawing up of budgets in the future, can you not include all the measures which are supposed to plug the loopholes and include them in the budget so that Hong Kong people can pass a fair comment on the budget, and we can see that the government is taking care of all sides taking care of the needs of all sides. So the plug hole this time of the budget is very large. If you live in a PRH, well, you are not taken care of by this budget. CSSA recipients can get triple payment, and then social conflict is heightened. Well, even if you plug the loophole, people don't want to thank you. So that's why we're seeing such great conflict today. The government must review the hurdles that you've met in relation to the budget. It may not be a bad budget, but the approach you have adopted, the publicity you have conducted, I think you've done wrong. I so submit.
Mr. Ray Chen, what is the point of order? I'd like to ask whether the FS is in the chamber. You can look around. I don't have my glasses. I can't see clearly. I'd like to call for a quorum, please. Mr. Ray Chen calls for a quorum.
請議員返。
Members, please go back to your seats so that we can count the numbers.
We
have a quorum. Members, order please. Mr. Poon Xiuping. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Strictly speaking, in 2018 to 2019, well, in this budget, this is the first complete budget written by our FS. We can see the style of public finance management of this FS. The public expected the FS to adopt a new style of managing public finances. When we have over $100 billion in surplus and trillions in terms of reserves, if you can take effective measures to lessen people's burden and also narrow the wealth gap and also to return wealth to the public so there are fewer grievances in society, that is something you should do. In the last budget, I complimented Mr. Ho Chan, who took up the FS post midterm. I complimented him for making good planning for public finances and also for abandoning some outdated policies. Therefore, with regard to the 2018-19 budget, I'm like many other citizens in society. I was very hopeful and I had expectations. In para 47, the FS talked about his new fiscal philosophy. He said the chief executive has put forward a new fiscal philosophy for the current term government. It emphasizes that on the premise of ensuring the health of our public finance, the government should adopt forward-looking and strategic financial management principles in optimizing the use of surplus to invest for Hong Kong and relieve our people's burdens. Unfortunately, I can't see the new term of government taking decisive actions in the budget in order to tackle structural social conflicts. The PA announced the public transport subsidy scheme. I criticized it for helping the rich, not the poor. I shall not repeat my points on that here. In this budget, those people who stand to gain most are the middle-class families who have high income and who own property, including tax returns, rates waiving, and also the heightening of allowances for dependents. This is a budget that is inclined to help the rich middle class. I can't support it. I don't think that should be the direction to take for future development. In this budget, Madam Deputy, there are many proposals that have to do with the labor sector. $15 billion have been put aside for tackling the abolition of the offsetting mechanism between MPF and the severance payment and long service payment. The SLW has said that there would be $12.7 billion put aside, and the administration has come up with an initial proposal for abolition of the offsetting mechanism. The labor sector supports it. We hope that when the administration consults society on the proposal and also when you make legislation for it, I hope you will also do advance work for bringing in the abolition mechanism so as to make sure that before the end of term of this current term government, you can implement the abolition scheme. The budget says that the administration is very concerned about non-skilled employees engaged in government outsourced contracts. Last year, when we reviewed the outsourcing contract system of government, I made 3 proposals. One, that the contractors should stipulate in contract terms that the hours per week should be 44, and also any overtime work must be compensated with 1.5 times the hourly rate. And also, the ultimate responsibility should be on the contractors. And also, there should be a higher score ratio for choosing contractors with regard to the protection of employee rights. I hope that the relevant working committee can accept my proposals. I hope the FS will also plow in resources for this to be done. Madam Deputy, occupational safety is something close to my heart. Last year, there were 29 fatal industrial accidents, out of which the construction industry accounted for 22 of those. And basically, every 2 weeks, we would have 1 fatal industrial accident in Hong Kong. And the construction sector is, in a way, the disaster area. In the budget, the FS says that the Hong Kong industrial sector or construction sector is having high efficiency. But I must remind the FS that this is paid for with workers' lives. Hong Kong should not continue to enjoy high construction efficiency exchanged with workers' lives. The FS says that we should go for technology in order to enhance environment efficiency and also to improve worksite safety. Improving worksite safety is only one of the measures mentioned by the FS. Is actually the last of the list. And also in the budget, there are just 6 words on it. It is glossed over, and you are not really facing up to the high fatality rate in industrial accidents. I have always asked you to review compensation for industrial accidents, so at least you can give more resources to site safety officers and site safety supervisors. On the issue of labor, I must mention what the FS said in the budget, that the latest unemployment rate is lower than 3%, meaning that there is a tight supply of labor. And with a fast-aging population, our labor force will reach its peak and level off in the next few years. To make sure that there is priority for employment for Hong Kong workers, he says we can look around to see whether there is the need for importation of labor for certain sectors. I must reiterate again, we must make sure that Hong Kong workers will enjoy priority of work, but then that should not set the scene for importation of labor. When the statutory minimum wage cannot sustain our workers, there is no way we can talk about giving work to local workers first. Madam Deputy, about new money, I'd like to make 2 points. Number 1, last year, $5 billion has been put aside for recurrent expenditure for education. And in this budget, there is another $2 billion. What is unfortunate is that in the education system, it doesn't include professional, occupational education. This year, you have $3 billion for that purpose, but there are 9 times that amount for tertiary education. Therefore, when you talk about occupational or industrial education, you said you would support it with both hardware and software. But society may view vocational education as second class. I believe you should do something to turn around that concept. And resource-wise, you must set vocational education as apart from cultural education. And you are not really helping this. In the past few years, you are not helping to turn out people for the different sectors. The HA has used $500 million to tackle the flu peak in order to take away pressure on frontliners. I don't know how many basic frontliners have benefited from that $500 million. At the special FC meetings, I asked about the situation of the allied medical professionals. I have found that there is a high wastage rate.
And retention of staff is not done well to attract the necessary talent. The pay and conditions of employment of these people should be reviewed so as to reduce wastage. And I would like to talk about the plan to give $4,000 to everyone as a solution to those who complained about not getting any benefit from the budget. But this is going to be a very cumbersome arrangement which would incur high administrative costs. And I don't think that the community's grievances can be fully addressed. I would like the FS to give $4,000 to every tenant in Hong Kong so that they can cope with the high cost of living. I believe this would effectively address social discord. So I submit. Mr. Chan Chi-Chin. Madam Chair, here we resume the second reading debate on the Appropriation Bill 2018. And the FS, Mr. Paul Chan, is responsible for the budget. But now we don't have Mr. Paul Chan with us. I have asked the Secretariat, and I've been told that we don't know whether the FS will come or when he will come. I have to say that I'm most disappointed. It's not personal. I believe most members have prepared their speeches and comments on the budget, and they would like to have an opportunity to exchange views with the FS. Of course, FS, you know your budget will be approved. And although we don't share your political views, and you may not like what I'm going to say or what other members would like to say, you should be here. You should listen to us here. This is the budget announced by the FS. And at that time, I said that please do it again. Please redo this budget. And actually, he has to redo this. It is said that this is a divisive budget. That's true, but of course, on the other hand, it's also a unifying factor for the people of Hong Kong, because all the political parties criticize the budget for the lack of sharing. I remember that in the press conference after the budget speech, I said something to that effect. And then hundreds of thousands of people viewed that particular video clip made during the conference, press conference. And I have been praised by people both from the pro-establishment camp and the anti-establishment camp. It's difficult to make the budget so bad. People used to say that even if you are an able housewife, you cannot make a meal without the material needed. But now we have too much surplus. This is a happy problem. And now that the FS has returned to join us, well, many people think that your budget is not good. And it's the view shared by people across the political spectrum. and everyone complains about the budget in some way. It's a laughing stock in the international community. Last year's surplus is $138 billion. I would say that this is also an underestimation of the real surplus, because at the end of February, the figure stood at $1,600 billion, $116 billion rather. It means that everyone can get $20,000 if the surplus is $138 billion. It's 1/3 of the fiscal reserve maintained by the colonial government. But with a big surplus, with such a big revenue for the government, are we seeing improvement in our livelihood? Of course not, because the surplus is achieved through pain and suffering of the people. The expenditure, the revenue has increased by 20.6% because of the higher land premium income. It's a 62% in land premium revenue, and stamp duty as well, 39.7 billion, an increase of 70%. All these have to do with property speculation. And the fact that we have property speculation, it has to do with a high land premium policy. The FS would deny this. I won't argue with you, FS. High land premium affects all aspects of life. So the big surplus is achieved through pain and suffering of our people. High land premium means that the people cannot afford to buy their homes, and high rental for offices, for shops, means rising prices. And everyone has to suffer the consequences. And that's why the people's power has always been in favor of giving everyone a handout. And it's only fair that you give everyone $10,000, because we have all paid a high price in order that you have such a big surplus. So that you should give the handout to mitigate the damage and loss of the people. But the government and the FS, on the contrary, want to give money to rich people. For example, the waiver of rates is not kept, so you can get $10,000 per tenement. And for the richest consortium, they would get a total waiver valued at $256 billion. For the chain shops, goldsmith shops, they would get $10,000 every shop for every shop they operate. Are they going to cut their prices? Would the consumer be benefited, or would they benefit their employees? Well, this budget aims really at returning riches to the rich, and therefore people feel insulted. The approval rating is 48.2, a record low, and the FS approval ratings has dropped from negative 11% to negative 24%. And on the 23rd of March, they announced a supplementary arrangement. It said it's a targeted arrangement for those who are eligible will get $4,000. But if you get other benefits with a total amount of less than $4,000, you get the difference. It's $311 million that would be incurred as administrative costs. So superficially, you seem to have heeded public opinion and come up with a remedial arrangement. But people are still unhappy for the slow progress and complicated procedure involved. And then they can have to wait for a long time to really get the money. That's why your ratings have dropped to negative 44%. And even for the CE has her ratings have dropped to the negative territory. And a few days ago, the former chairman of the I.Bill said that this is more complicated than quantum mechanics. And we're talking about a mathematician, Mr. Jasper Zhang, who cannot really do the calculations. So how can you expect ordinary people to manage this? And now the FS still insists that this is a focused approach. You are spending money where we should. And of course, if we need to offer a scheme like this to give handout, we need to incur some administrative costs. Last time, it's $11 billion more than the last one offered by Mr. John Zhang. It was $30 billion last time. Now it's $11 billion more. But even the old women you know that you are spending less. Last time, because it was $6,000 that the government offered. I don't have much time. I just give you one more example to tell that this budget is misplaced in its focus, and that's the suggestion, the proposal to subsidize the examination fee of DSCs, and now it's restricted to full-time students, not those who repeat their Form 6 education. You know that there are different comments and ways of responding to this proposal on the internet. There are people saying that they would get nothing, and then many people think that, well, I will at least get something if I manage to be benefited under the DSC examination fee waiver. But I don't know how many of them will actually go down that route and claim the subsidy. Would anyone take leave to take the DSE examination just to create chaos or to vent their emotion? And now you don't want to help those who are on self-study. So I've told the Secretary for Education, well, that many netizens are angry about this change of mind, and they would now they are now prepared to pay the examination fee in order to make things difficult to arrange. Are you going to bar these people or these people on self-study to enroll? I don't think you would do that. It's said that the Education Bureau doesn't want to have this, but the FS, you have failed to anticipate the repercussions among netizens. And many people, many parents, as suggested by Mr. Yip Kyun Yin, would rather not to have the examination fee waiver, because you attract people to take the examination and create chaos. And now, because of the views expressed by netizens, you are not going to help private candidates. We should help private candidates, because they may be also working at the same time. They may try to improve on their grades. This is disappointing. I have this work in front of me. Not mine. It's not mine. It's from the Joint Conference on Universal Retirement Protection. They want me to show you this. First of all, it's a ridicule on your proposed remedial arrangement to benefit more people. Some people ask me that if the FS really give everyone $10,000, would I vote in favor or vote to support the budget? I said no. If you have a surplus of $150 billion and we have elections next year and the year after next, and if you only give a waiver for race, people won't let you off. So I said there might be a next year you get a new benefit, and before you get the benefit promised this year. And these people from the Joint Conference in the 80s and some in the 90s, they would like to get immediate protection. Because I've said that I've asked and I'm told that the benefit will go to their estate even if they die while waiting, even if they may not be able to see the implementation, but they would like to have the protection for the future generations, for future elders of our community. When we have a surplus of more than $100 billion and reserve of more than $1 trillion, and we still won't offer retirement protection, when is the right time to do it? The CE is said to be against offering benefits to all, but we have many policies which will benefit everyone. So if you want me to support the budget, then you should introduce universal retirement protection.
Ms. Alohin. Madam Deputy, this is the first budget under the Carrie Lam administration, and for Mr. Paul Chan, it is his second budget. Carrie Lam has always wanted to differentiate herself from Mr. 689, so she's promoting new approaches, including the new fiscal philosophy. For example, and later we will see a new Lam, new Paul Chan, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's still the same story, and that is she fails to spend money properly, and the people cannot benefit. In the current budget, Mr. Paul Chan expects a surplus of $138 billion, while a lot of accountancy firms expect a surplus of $160 billion, and the Treasury will have hefty reserves. But the surplus would not erode the wave barriers, but it will affect the already low ratings of Paul Chan. According to an HKU poll, after announcing the budget, the rating of Paul Chan dropped by 12% to minus 24 points. So he does not know how to spend the money. When other economies or governments are worried about a lack of money, the SAR government does not know how to spend it. Compared with the financial chiefs of many countries, you are already having a head start. But after the budget was announced, it was widely booed by the public, and the public generally found it lacking. So why couldn't you improve livelihood? And you are performing worse and worse. The only answer is that the budget was not designed for the for 90% of the public, but instead they catered for the for those who have vested interests and the consortiums. Money should be redistributed to tackle housing and youth issues, but the Gini coefficient was worse at 0.539. The poverty alleviation is even worse than Singapore, who is our major competitor. Another study this year showed that for the 8th straight year, Hong Kong is the city with the most unaffordable housing. So even if you don't spend anything for 19.4 years, well, you have to save up for 19.4 years to afford a flat. So is the budget an answer? I'm sure most people are pessimistic. In the budget, Mr. Paul Chan cited 3 objectives, and that is diversified economy, investing in the future, and caring and sharing. And I'd like to comment on these. I think the fact is they are upholding the monopoly and returning wealth to the wealth. The buzzword of this year's budget is to patch up the deficiencies. Well, we have seen history being skewed in some textbooks. Well, I see Mr. Kevin Young here. Mrs. Carrie Lam, Financial Secretary, told us what it means by patching up the deficiencies. And we have a population of 7.4 million, and including 6 million adults. So how many people have we left behind? We left behind 3 million people, or nearly half the population. I don't think we should call them deficiencies. How can they not know that 3 million people would not be able to benefit? Why can't the government produce such figures? So these are not deficiencies but ignorance. That means the government knowingly choose to ignore these people because they don't have votes, and they are not voters in functional constituencies either. And there have been plenty of PR crises, and given the circumstances, the government decided to give cash to these 3 million people. Even the pro-Beijing camp chipped in by criticizing the budget. So you can see that the entire budget is extremely poor. So the so-called caring and sharing might only apply to those with flats. Very often, the middle class in Hong Kong would face considerable burden, and I understand the intention of offering tax and rates rebates, but why can't you set caps on the exemptions or rebates? Why are you allowing unlimited rebates and not just the your own property? For the top 10 rate payers enjoying the greatest exemptions, the total savings amount to $260 million, and the top rate payer saved $100 million. So the government might say that of the top 10 rate payers, in more than 80% of the cases, the tenants could benefit from the rates exemptions. And the government painted another picture in another paper. It was a response to Mr. Wu Chiwa and Mr. James To. They said for residential premises, only 4% of the cases rates are paid by tenants, but for non-domestic premises, more than half the tenants are paying the rates. So what does this show? The government is justifying their policy of returning wealth to the wealth through these 80% of the tenants. But we all know that at the end, the owners would benefit. With the welfare measures of the budget for CSSA recipients, OAA, OALA, DA, or low-income family allowance recipients, the total benefits only amount to $3.6 billion. But for rates and tax concessions, the total savings was $2.92 billion. So can this really improve the poverty gap? So this is what I mean by returning wealth to the rich people. money is being distributed to those with no such needs. At the end, caring and sharing only apply to some to the high-end population. The government wants to develop a new economy, and I'd like to talk about Mr. Joseph Yan, a former EXCO member, and he said he talked about the multiplying effects, and that is to spend money on the most effective projects. But when we look at this budget, they are still using the old mentality of driving the economy with infrastructure. Infrastructure expenditure exceeds $100 billion, but for the White Elephant projects such as Hongzhou-Macau Bridge XRL and artificial islands, the quality is extremely poor. Can they really benefit Hong Kong people? I'm sure we all have an answer. In terms of economic impact, we are at a state of virtually full employment. We are using public money to drive infrastructure, and construction costs are also driven up. And with the infrastructure investments, you might be benefiting the importers of heavy machineries or raw materials, but does this actually benefit our GDP? So the benefits might happen outside of Hong Kong. If this is what it means by the new fiscal philosophy, it's not convincing. You are investing the surplus on infrastructure, and this would not improve your return. Even if you invest $30 billion, you might not get $30 billion back. And I'm also concerned about the investment on INT. $20 billion is invested on the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park at the Loop area. So regardless of whether infrastructure projects can achieve the multiplier effects, but from past experience such as the Science Park, Cyberport, West Kowloon Cultural District, at the end, they have all become development projects or real estate projects. So if the government wants to promote INT, at the end they might become another real estate project. So have you identified the real difficulties for startups? So many of them fail to open bank accounts, and they might have to survive 5 years and so on. Is investing $20 billion in the INT park the best approach? This year's budget offers recurrent subsidy to the Financial Services Development Council, and they are working with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority to train up talents. But again, in 2012, Joseph Yam said that for the CE candidate CY Leung's proposal to set up a FSDC, Mr. Joseph Yam was concerned, and the proposal might be redundant. I would use the time slots for debate for the budget to explain these issues. The government wants to invest in the future, but for the society, resources should be spent on education and healthcare. The budget is more aggressive than the previous budgets, and there is more recurrent expenditure on healthcare and education, but they are not enough. With the hefty reserves, we are very well placed to tackle many problems, but the percentage to GDP is still much lower than many cities. And we also need to talk about tertiary education. Universities are the nurturing grounds for our talents, but over the past 10 years, the UGC has been pursuing internationalization and rankings, and teaching and research have not been the focus. Recently, CTU launched a they suspended a part-time degree or social work program or bachelor's program, and a lot of the staff were dismissed, or the tutors were dismissed by PolyU. When we look at the youth mainland exchange program, the audit, according to the Audit Commission, the focus was on the mainland but not on global views. The vetting procedures were very lax, and money is going down the drains. For exchange programs in the mainland, the figures were 41 million and 70 million, but for the international exchange program, the budget is only $6 million, so the difference is 7 times. As our students go north, we should encourage them to go global as well. At the committee stage, I would move amendments to look at these issues. Madam Deputy, I would describe the budget as failing to spend the money, and the people cannot benefit. The surplus is at a historical high for the cash handouts. The government is using a very complicated approach. The government should alleviate poverty. With such a wealthy society, we still have so many issues. So, so long as the government is not being held accountable to the public, well, we are not able to choose the chief executive, and the government officials will not serve us. 8 years ago, within the de facto memorandum, the slogan was, without democracy, there could be no livelihood. I think this still applies to the budget. So I urge people to join the May 1st protests. Please stop speaking.
Mr. Wong Cheng-Kwang. Thank you, President. We'd like to say that a stable society should be rhomboid in shape. The bigger the size of the middle class, the more effective it will be in dissolving social tensions and disputes in society. In reality, the middle class is in fact the sandwich class. They're responsible for very heavy burdens, but rarely can they enjoy social welfare benefits. And in the long term, this is detrimental to social stability. In this year's budget, we are pleased to see that this term of government has finally realized the gravity of this matter. When this budget was announced, there were a lot of measures to assist and support the middle class. For instance, rates concession, improvement to the profits tax system, and also widen the tax band from $45,000 to $50,000, and instead of 4, we have 5 salary bands. This will lower the tax liability of the middle class. Children's allowance, also the ceiling for deductible expenses are increased. I think this goes to protect the core values of family so that the middle class can take better care of their families and their burden will be lessened. The budget has got measures to show its care for the middle class as a reward for their contribution to society. I hope that this budget, or next year's budget, can continue to implement this rationale and continue to support the middle class. And for the business sector, we have 98% SMEs in Hong Kong. To create a favorable business environment for them should be an important aspect of the budget for the business sector. In this year's budget, we can see many measures conducive to the development of SMEs. For instance, we have finally removed
the barricades in profit tax. For the first $200 million in profit, the tax rate is halved from 16.5 to 8.25%. And also funding for branding, marketing, and expansion into the mainland market. We call it BUD, dedicated funds, and also SME market promotion and development funds. We have an injection of $1.5 and $1 billion into them respectively. The scope of assistance is now widened, and also the restrictions are relaxed. This will help SMEs. For future development, innovation and technology will be the lifeline of an enterprise. The budget has reserved another $50 billion to promote the development of I&T. There will be enhanced financial assistance, and there will be various measures. And for R&D expenses of local enterprises, there will be more tax concessions. And eligible enterprises will see their first $2 million are spent in R&D, receiving a tax rebate of up to 300%. And the balance will also receive more tax concessions. These measures will be conducive to enhancing SMEs' ability in innovation in R&D. This will expedite the pace of reindustrialization in Hong Kong. These are highlights of the budget. However, the biggest deficiency in this year's budget is, given our huge surplus, the care and support for the grassroots is not as good as it was in the past, although there will be another 2 months of allowance for those on Social Security, and $2,000 will be granted to all students. And then the school candidates for the 2019-20 DSE examination, the exam fees will be waived. However, there are people who have been lagged behind, and therefore caring and support and sharing scheme has been launched. According to the paper submitted to Council, the administrative cost of this scheme is as high as $311 billion. 7 years ago, there was comprehensive cash handout of $6,000 to the community, and now the administrative cost is $110 million more than it was. I hope that in the next year's budget, the FS can learn from this experience, and when incorporating views of the DAB and the community, please do not adopt a stopgap approach. You should consider in-depth and comprehensively the effectiveness and the cost-effectiveness of measures, and assess the reaction of the community to these measures, so that you don't have to make major revisions after your budget is criticized by the community, because this approach will greatly enhance the administrative cost of the administration, and is also detrimental to the government's credibility. Since the 2003-04 budget, the government has been using this operating expense envelope approach. All policy directors are allowed to deploy resources flexibly among areas within their portfolio, so that they can deploy resources to deal with pressing issues of the community. And FS, after considering their submissions, will give them an envelope for the expenses for the coming year. So on the use of public funds, I'd like to say that this envelope approach has its merits. However,
there is also a downside to it. Under this mechanism, policy bureaus will only apply for resources for its own kitty and would only care for issues under their own bureau. So they will only take care of their own business and ignore the policy issues of other bureaus. Now, because of new trends in economic development, very often issues involve more than one policy bureau. There must be collaboration among various bureaus and departments. Under the expenditure envelope approach, government officials cannot effectively tackle new modes and trends in economic development and meet the new demands, because these new activities and issues will be relevant to a number of regulators and policy bureaus. As a result, no one is in charge of these new activities. So should we continue to adopt this expenditure envelope approach? Is it useful for the current mode of governance? There should be a review to consider how to enhance flexible collaboration among bureaus and departments so that there can be supporting measures to break the barriers between bureaus so that we can provide timely services to the community better. I'd like to stress that no matter when and where, government's fiscal philosophy should consider not just blood transfusion, but in making blood. What I mean is, given that we have greatly increased revenue from stamp duty and land income, we have over $100 billion in surplus. The media already predicted that the public coffers will be burst to seams, and there were rising calls for handing out cash to the people. However, even though we are doing very well now, there is no guarantee that we can be as lucky always. So the government must be forward-looking and save for rainy day so that we can be well equipped to enhance our competitiveness. While we have a huge surplus, we have to spend it effectively. We should not squander it at once. We have to relieve the hardship of the community, and we should be targeted in alleviating the burden of the grassroots and the needy. Meanwhile, we should also spend a certain proportion of our resources to develop the community, to nurture talents, and to invest in the future. We should improve community facilities and develop infrastructure to maintain our competitiveness in creating wealth so that we can be well prepared for continued economic development of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Mr. Gary Fan, President. The FS has broken the record of getting the surplus wrong. It is stated as $138 billion. The actual outturn may be even higher. It's more than $121 billion than the previous estimates. So it's only right that the FS return the wealth to people, because there's a lack of a long-term planning and long-term commitment in formulating the necessary policies. Therefore, if you don't have a long-term commitment, you should return the wealth accumulated to people. But what has the budget proposed? the $4,000 handout is just a token gesture. You are going to pay DSE examination for the candidates, and then there will be 10,000 Ocean Park tickets to students, and there are people saying that this is actually transfer of benefits to the Ocean Park. And now you propose $4,000 for everyone who gets nothing from the budget. This will involve a high administrative cost, and it's complicated. It doesn't really return wealth to people. This year is different. People who used not to support giving a handout changed their mind this time. They are in favor of returning money to the people. Why? Because more and more people in Hong Kong have no expectation of the government. The government hasn't done its job well, since they do not believe that the government would take specific and concrete measures to address social problems such as aging population, manpower shortage in the healthcare sector, and the difficulty of young people to buy homes or to get decent housing. People believe that the government is not putting their interests first, since they are so disappointed, and they have no hope for the government. So they think maybe it's better to get the money back, and then they will try to find a solution for themselves. This change of mentality is really saddening. The public credibility of government is lost. Especially, the government has failed to address the difficulties faced by the elderly and the young people, and also the social contradictions which have adversely affected the grassroots. Not counting the $3 trillion in reserve, we have $1 trillion in reserve. More than 27 months of expenditure incurred by the government is more than enough to address so many deep-rooted social conflicts and problems. In 2017, the Gini coefficient has risen to 0.581. 10 years ago, the government believed in the trickling effect. That is to say, if the government develop the economy with a bigger pie, every sector in the community will benefit. But as a matter of fact, the wealth gap has not improved. So the last term government said the government should be more proactive in spending money where money should be spent. For this term of government, it claims to espouse a new philosophy and will make the best use of our reserve. But it's just beautiful talk about our financial planning, but nothing has been done. Because of the surplus and the huge reserves, the government has set up many dedicated funds, and injections have been made. We have not made the best use of many of them. In 2016, there is the Future Fund with an injection of $220 billion. So far, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority has just invested half of the funds. The remaining half is actually sufficient to be used as seed money for a universal retirement protection scheme. The accumulator's reserve is now the reserve on the part of HA is $78.8 billion. And the HA is able to carry out the public housing program without any injection. And now for the 10-year hospital redevelopment plan with a total injection of $200 billion, only the 4% has been spent. As for the INT, the development fund, only 6% of the allocated funds has been committed. The government has failed to make the best use of these funds. So one wonders whether this is just a ploy on the part of the government to fool the people and to respond to public opinions asking for better utilization of our finances. But actually, nothing has been achieved. President, the allocation of funds to various areas is also problematic. For education, compared with last year, there's been a 28% increase in expenditure, but the recurrent expenditure on education as a percentage of GDP has been on the decline for years. This year, the year-on-year increase is just 5.6%. It's the second last among different government portfolios. The recurrent expenditure on education is growing so slow. It shows that there's no long-term planning on the development of education, and it shows a lack of long-term commitment. At present, 80% of the age group of the student cohorts in the right age group will get UGC-funded places in university. But the number remains 15,000 a year since 1994. The government is reluctant to increase the number of bachelor degree places. So many young people can only opt for the associate degree programs because of the lack of investment in education, and the upward mobility and development of our young people are therefore stifled. President, in the past 10 years, expenditure on elderly services as a percentage of social welfare expenditure has just increased from 9.7% in 2007 and 2008 to just 11%. The growth is at a snail's pace. It shows that the government is ill-prepared to cope with the problems associated with aging population, and not to mention that there is no policy, no measures to respond to other than needed areas. If we look at the public healthcare sector, it's overloaded. A few months ago, during the peak flu season, there were fatalities. The A&E department was overcrowded with patients. On 2 occasions, the government cut the recurrent funding for HA. This year, for the recurrent allocation of $61.5 billion for HA, represent an 11% over last year. And many of the new fundings are provided to catch up for past deficiencies. And the wastage rate of healthcare workers is at a record high of 5.9%, with a smaller manpower, and yet they have to cope with the increase in service levels. So if the government doesn't provide the necessary resources, they cannot cope. Don't tell us that we can cope with the future demand by just spending $100 billion or $200 billion in hospital redevelopment projects. On the one hand, people are very strict about certain policy areas. On the other, we are very generous about some other areas. For example, $20 billion will be invested in the Loop area for a innovation and technology park. it would be used on infrastructure. It said that it would be used to develop I&T. But this is just another infrastructure project which will follow many we embarked on in previous years. The total expenditure is $85.6 billion, or 15.4% of the total expenditure, and it's much higher than that for education. We have so many expensive infrastructure projects which aim at promoting integration with the mainland. Over the years, we have sustained a very high level of infrastructure investment. Hong-Yun-Wai, BCF, Hong-Zhuang-Macau Bridge, XRL, all of these are carried out to promote the integration of Hong Kong into the bigger Bay Area. But is that what people in Hong Kong want? But this is actually something that done at the direction of the authorities in Beijing. They want to go for regional integration. That's why we have been asked to carry out so many infrastructure projects. The final cost for the I&T park will be at least $75 billion, not counting the overrun, the budget overrun that would arise later, because according to past records, every such project suffer from budget overruns. It's said by the government, in order to promote the Bay Area, the park is located close to Shenzhen. The Hong Kong government will also provide convenient facility for the people coming over from Shenzhen, and it said that many Shenzhen R&D institutions will be attracted to the park. Ladies and gentlemen, President, ladies and gentlemen, these are all paid by Hong Kong people with dubious effectiveness and return. But we are going to spend $20 billion for the advanced works. Once again, the government has illustrated to us that they don't put our interests first. So the Neo-Democrats and I myself cannot support the budget this year. For many years, the government relied on the short-term funding allocations to solve problems, such as giving handout. The Neo-Democrats would like to ask the government to do more in education, in elderly services, and public health care. There should be a higher commitment for these areas. HA should get a bigger recurrent funding, and there should be the provision of a seed money to kickstart the Universal Retirement Protection Scheme. So if we do this, then we can return wealth to government, and at the same time, we show long-term commitment. President, later I will be giving explanation on my proposed amendments to the Appropriation Bill.
Does any other member wish to speak? The meeting is I now adjourn the Council until 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 2nd of May 2018.